And now, a continuation of Quantum Gate by Jane E. Hawkins, as read by the Plurality Report. Chapter 13. The hangar doors irised open, and Griffin headed down the dark and glittering hall. As he rounded the first corner toward the simulation room, he saw two UN people standing in front of the security area talking. They were deeply intent on each other. The blond, Slavic-looking man wore a full-bore UN monkey suit with a black collar and captain's cummerbund. The dark-haired woman, a guard judging by her uniform, smiled broadly. "So what's the problem?" Griffin heard her say as he approached. She tilted her head, looking into the man's eyes flirtatiously. The man moved his shoulders uncomfortably. "I don't think it would be a good idea." "Come on, I just asked you for a drink. What's the problem?" "Well, I'm an officer, for one thing." Her voice turned mocking. "Oh, God, you don't really..." The captain saw Griffin approaching, and his face darkened. "Do you need something, soldier?" Cold blue eyes calculated him and found him wanting. Griffin felt his face flush. They both knew he'd overheard the conversation. I'm just leaving." The guard smiled. She really was a pretty woman. The officer was a fool to hesitate. "No problem," she said, and turned away from him. He backed off, walking hurriedly in the opposite direction of the simulation room. He didn't want any more attention out of UN people than he could avoid. The corridor curved dark ahead of him, lit by golden spots and flanked by red support struts. He heard the guard's light voice say teasingly, "Anyway, I'd like you to come over for a shot of vodka tonight." "Vodka? This has possibilities." Griffin glanced back as he rounded the corner, and the blonde officer was standing much closer to the guard. She smiled brightly into his face. Someone was going to get laid tonight. The thought suddenly hurt him. He took a few steps more, then stopped in the middle of the corridor. His first time with Jenny. He had been in a hurry that day, intending to meet a couple friends for a show. The Raven Entertainment Mall was right on the outskirts of the Century City enclave and teemed with people. It claimed to have fully filtered air and light so that you could check your protective gear at the entrance and walk around unencumbered even during toxin alerts. A year later, those claims have been disproved, but who could have forecast such a density of airborne polymers? That day, it seemed as though everyone in the city was there and all of them were determined to get in Griffin's way. He'd finally made it to a level that wasn't too overrun, but only 2 of the lifts were working. He had 5 minutes to get to the theater, maybe 10 if Ruthern was feeling kind. Otherwise, they would go in without him and he'd have to take catch can. The productions were always more fun when you knew at least some of the other actors. "Excuse me, did you drop this?" said a voice from behind him, and he turned. For a moment, time stopped. She wasn't beautiful, not in any classic way, yet the wildly curling reddish blonde hair floating around a triangular face with big eyes held him, spoke to him. She was wearing a low-cut green dress that might have been made of velvet, a daring material to wear these days. Most people avoided cloth that had a nap because it tended to trap allergens and toxins. The dress reminded him vaguely of medieval stories about the maiden who gets saved from the dragon. "What?" said Griffin, caught between fascination and irritation. "Did you drop this money?" She held out a bundle of plats. He glanced at it. Looked like a substantial, though not flabbergasting amount. "No." He couldn't figure out why he kept watching her face. She wasn't pretty in the ways that usually caught his attention. Vivid, yes, that was it. She seemed very vivid. "Are you sure?" She frowned slightly. "Because I thought I just saw it fall out of your pants pocket." She pointed toward the lifts. "No, it's not mine. I keep my money in my wallet." He began to turn away. "You're sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." "'Cause there's a lot of money here." She looked at the wad of plats and shook her head. "Look, it's not mine," he said. The lady was cute, but her brain must have evaporated with the ozone layer. If he was late, his friends wouldn't wait. Still, she had a nice smile. She rifled the wad in her hands, then pointed at it. "There's $300 here." "Regardless, that is not my money." "You're sure? 'Cause this is a lot of money to just pass up." "Look, it's not like I'm giving anything up. It was never mine to begin with." Time to go. Past time to go. The lady was just not fully enabled. "You're telling me you have no claim to this cash?" She patted it, and suddenly grinned at him. What did that mean? This had gone on too long. Just walk away. You might make it to the theater in time if you take the stairs and hurry. "That is correct," he said impatiently. "Yes." He still didn't leave, though. She waved the bundle at him. "We could split it." Griffin raised his hands into the air. "No, I don't want to split that money with you. I don't want a single plat's worth of that money. I don't know who it belongs to, and I don't care." She was half flinching before his vehemence, which made him feel simultaneously guilty and even more vehement. "You may keep it or give it to someone. Hell, you can burn it for all I care." "Well, all right. I get the point." She started to turn away. Long curling hair trailed down her back. He had an urge to reach out, tangle his fingers in the mass of it. He turned toward the lifts to see if any were going to arrive soon. He tried to be relieved that the crazy lady was finally going to leave him alone. He stared unseeing at the readout panel, still thinking about her hair, wanting to touch it, wondering how it smelled. She spoke to him again. He jumped, as embarrassed as if she had caught him actually trying to touch her without permission. She grinned, her face turning triangular. Oh God, you know what? I'm so embarrassed. I just remembered. This money did not fall out of your pants pocket. It's my money." "You just remembered it's your money?" "Oh, wait a minute." He started to speak and found all words beyond him. He just gaped at her. Her smile became more tentative. "I came over here and dropped it because I thought you had a really great ass and I really wanted to meet you." He was dumbstruck. "You thought I had a great ass. You're using a bundle of cash to pick up a guy in a public walkway." "Can I buy you a latte?" she said, waving the wad. "I've just come into a little cash and I'm feeling generous." He told himself to walk away. Instead, he nodded. She grinned with delight, skipped forward and wrapped herself around his right arm. She half dragged him in the opposite direction of the theater. Ruthern, Sala, and Bend wouldn't care that much if he didn't show up. He'd just tell them he got struck by a tornado. Griffin didn't like lattes, but he drank 3 cups that evening. And then they went to a bar, and he drank single malt scotch for the first time. He liked that better. He was one very wired drunk for the first time he'd gone to bed with Jenny. He never quite knew why he'd done it. It wasn't that unusual for women to try and pick him up. But Jenny wasn't usual. She never was, and never would be. She reached for his mind and his heart even before she reached for his body, and he could not have pulled back. Never wanted to pull back. Until later. Griffin's face was wet with tears. He looked around sharply, afraid he might not have heard someone walking toward him. He wiped his face on his uniform sleeve. What was wrong with him? He'd been able to hold away such thoughts for months. What good was it to think of Jenny? That was all over now. Even if she would be willing to see him again, what could he be for her? She was better off without him. He was better off here. He felt sick again, as sick as he'd felt this morning, but this time his mind just wouldn't turn off, wouldn't stop the replay of memories. He looked around wildly, seeking anything to distract him, and found a door labeled Quantum Gate. Without pausing to think, he strode toward it, half expecting a security denial. Instead, the door irised open and let him in. Chapter 14. A slightly smaller version of the Quantum Gate Griffin had entered in the Fort Chicago hangar occupied the center of the room. The sight made his head feel strange. He looked away and saw a short man in a yellow uniform looking up at a large display of shifting red and black. The symbol on his back was 3 overlapping ovals. Griffin frowned. What did that mean? He couldn't recall having seen it in the station's heraldry descriptions. Griffin coughed to announce his presence. The man turned, and his large, thick glasses flashed red for a moment from the display. The poor guy must not react well to corrective surgery. Some people didn't, and then they had to wear those things on their faces. The tag on his left breast said, Charlie Becker, followed by a bunch of initials and the insignia of ovals again. Griffin couldn't make sense of any of it. The little man gave a pinched half-smile that looked more like a grimace. Sorry, guy, this is off limits. You're not allowed back here. I didn't realize, Griffin said. What is this? Is this the gate? Yeah, sure is, said Charlie Becker, and made no move to toss Griffin out. Griffin looked around the room uneasily, trying to find something that looked familiar. You know, I don't remember coming through here. Most people don't. We don't know why. Dr. Marks thinks it's a product of the profound frequency shift. She thinks it proves that all thought, or at least all memory, is frequency-based. So what's the profound frequency shift? Oh, it's Elizabeth's. Then the man paused over the name, seeming to savor it. It's her theory. It's part quantum mechanics and part... The man lowered his voice in a mocking way. Transcendental vision. Woo-wee! He raised his hands like a kid saying boo. It's the perfect synthesis of intellect. He held up his right hand and made an eating gesture. And intuition. Then he raised his left hand and brought the two together. Griffin smiled and nodded as though he understood. The odd man continued. She is one of the greatest minds of our age. I'll tell you that right now. He stared over Griffin's right shoulder. I am so in love with her. No, Griffin thought, no, I don't want to know. I don't want to think about. Gosh, I have this recurring daydream where I turn around and... He flushed. Anyway. He laughed shrilly and gestured toward the display screen. This is really amazing. It's so simple. It really shouldn't work at all. Becker turned to look at the screens. Griffin stared at him, feeling cold inside, and, quite suddenly, every other emotion disappeared. Shouldn't work at all? He echoed. The gate shouldn't work? Well, I understand completely all the physical processes the gate uses, but, I don't quite see how it works, he shrugged violently. I shouldn't. I don't see how it could take us anywhere. It's almost as if the combination, or rather the physical placement of the parts causes a quantum anomaly that allows... And his hands moved in a rolling forward gesture. The gate to work. I don't know. I just don't really see how it works. Elizabeth sees it clearly. Sometimes I wonder if we really are on AJ3905. Well, where the hell else would we be? Prickles of fear ran down his spine, and Griffin clenched his fists angrily. He kept looking for answers and getting more questions. How would we know? The little man shrugged again. We could be in Trinidad. They could have told us we were going to some random number and then just shipped us off to Sumatra. He smiled as though this was a delightful idea. Probably was. Griffin imagined the guy fantasizing about Marks and Sumatra and steamy jungles and pushed the image away. Becker's face turned serious. I wonder about that sometimes. I wonder about where we might really be. Yeah? Griffin took a deep breath. If we're on Earth, then why are we shooting at the natives, Charlie? I mean, are we at war with Sumatra? Charlie Becker giggled. Sumatra? War? Oh, hardly. But you said you don't understand why the gate works, didn't you? And that we could be somewhere on Earth? Ah, well, really, I don't quite, I mean... Then Becker focused on something behind Griffin. His face lit up and he beckoned wildly. I told him to go, Becker said. This is restricted. I told him so. Griffin turned. The UN captain he'd seen earlier out in the hall stepped from beside the door to stand in front of Griffin. By the expression on the blond man's face, Griffin knew he was in trouble. He sighed. Had the man followed him here? Great to have made an officer into an enemy so soon. What are you doing? Said the UN man. I told you you're not supposed to be here. The officer whipped out a small electric camera, flashed it at Griffin, and examined the readout. "Private Griffin, you're now on report." He stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "On report? Oh, great. What a jerk!" Griffin bit down a half-dozen possible replies, such as the officer had given him a move along in the corridor, but had not told him he couldn't go into the lab. He knew this guy's type. Anything he said would just make things worse. He stared at the captain for a moment. Becker peered anxiously over the captain's shoulder. Griffin nodded coldly and walked out. Chapter 15. The simulators were nearby now, but the idea of another run didn't seem appealing anymore. He wanted to be alone in a quiet place. The thought of going back to his room gave him the shudders. Where could he just go to sit? The atrium. That had to be an entrance to it on this floor. He'd seen a couple of benches dotted about, but only once seen someone sitting on one. The entrance to the atrium wasn't marked on the maps, but he wandered around on the first floor until he found it opposite of the airlock. The sweet, moist smell of growing plants filled his nostrils as the door irised open. Someone was already there, standing near the statue and looking up at the light pouring down. He hesitated, thought about turning around, then realized it was Marie Lucas, the nurse from sickbay. "Hey!" he said, and her broad face creased in a smile. He returned her smile, genuinely pleased to see her. She seemed so solid, so human. She had an air about her that made him think she never got confused about reality or responsibility. She knew what was what and held to it. "Do you believe this?" Marie said and gestured up. His gaze followed her hand past twinning lengths of leafy green and several layers of doors and vents. At the apex of the atrium was a circle of glowing glass, traces of blue and white refracted in the glass. He looked back at her. What's that?" "The dome." He looked up again, and she continued. "It looks just like a sky. I can't believe it." She shook her head. Then she smiled, and posed herself to look coy. "I'm out here working on my tan." They both laughed. She had about as deep a natural tan as anyone was likely to get. "I wonder how it's done," said Griffin. Marie frowned. "I don't know. I thought it was that spectra stone stuff, like the walls, but it looks too good for that, too real, doesn't it? I mean, look at this. This is real sunlight." She waved her hands at the light streaming down. "I can't figure out for the life of me why they went to all this trouble. Not that I'm complaining. You know, supposedly it duplicates the sky on Earth from 500 years ago, and it's matched with the time on Earth. So when it's 5 o'clock back home, it's 5 o'clock here. So which city is it matched to?" "Well, you know, that's a good question. Probably New York. I know how the UN is," she shrugged. "But you gotta figure they get it right." She laughed suddenly. "Either that or they fake it real good. Like this flowers stuff. I'm a city girl. I know what grass looks like, and that's about it. But this stuff, for all I know, it could be made up in some lab somewhere." Griffin looked at the plants, then looked at Marie Lucas again. "Do you think it is?" he said. She shrugged and stood. "I don't know, soldier boy. Tell you one thing, though, this city gal's gonna be real happy to get back to Earth, you know what I mean? May not be any great shakes anymore, but it's home." She looked around unhappily. "And this place sure ain't either." She nodded to him and walked down the path toward the door. Griffin sat on the nearest bench, watching that lovely bright light. It'd be nice to chat, but it was nicer still just to feel the warmth and the heavy sweetness of the air, and the slightly damp bench underneath him. Idly, he fingered a small, lily-like flower that leaned over the bench. It was bright orange, shading to yellow, with brown spots at its heart, clustered with others at the end of a curving stem. It fell off its stem and rested in his palm. He snapped his fingers shut around it, expecting an AP to show up to chide him, or that uptight UN captain to march in and put him on report again. When nothing happened, he slowly opened his fingers again and looked. It was beautiful, an intricate but smooth flaring of petals and stamen. He sniffed it, enjoying the lovely scent. Then, very carefully, he put it and his hand in his pocket and returned to his room. He found a glass in the bathroom and cautiously poured an inch of water into it, then floated the tiny flower in the water. Its sweet smell filled the room. "Dinner will be ready in the mess hall in 10 minutes. Please report to the mess hall for dinner in 10 minutes. Griffin automatically tucked the impromptu vase behind him, but it was only the AP, whose pretty face glazed out at him from the Militerm screen. Griffin frowned at it for a moment, wondering if his room was being monitored. He never really worried about having his billet surveyed before. Privacy was a right you specifically signed away when you joined Beatrice. But he didn't feel right about the flower, and didn't want to get rid of it either. Finally, he hid it against the wall, behind the pile of his books, and headed out for dinner. Hynek and Castle were already waiting for the mess hall AP to serve them when he arrived. Hynek, ever hopeful, was trying out his wiles again. The boy astonished Griffin. Castle, tough and mature and sarcastic, was even less likely to fall for Hynek than Dr. Mirren. Dinner was even worse than lunch. How did they do it? Macaroni and cheese just wasn't a complex meal. The noodles were amazingly tough, which he'd expected, but the cheese sauce was truly amazing. He hadn't realized that you could get melted plastic to smell that way. Alonzo and Tish came in as he was arranging the macaroni into lines of soldiers on his plate. He waved them over for the distraction. He had to eat this stuff, but he didn't want to have to think about it. "How are you doing?" Griffin asked as he took another bite. "I've been better." Tish put down his tray. "Did the doc say anything about how long this gate lag stuff lasts?" Alonzo pulled up a chair. "A day or two is what I hear." "Great," said Tish, and ate a forkful of the indecent orange food. His face folded into a grimace. "Let's say we entertain ourselves in the meantime by hanging the cook." "Then we get to eat your cooking?" said Alonzo. "No way. I've survived worse than this." Griffin gave him a skeptical glance and then went back to his food. Alonzo had always seen worse, eaten worse, and done worse than anyone else. Only Michaels bothered with trying to compete. "What do you think of our new CO?" said Griffin. "Tough as nails and twice as ambitious." Tish nodded tightly for emphasis. Griffin raised an eyebrow. "What's new? Aren't they all?" "You talked with anyone on this base yet?" Tish asked. "Nah," Griffin said. "Just a nut mechanic and a really strange little guy who works on the quantum gate." "Charlie Becker? Yeah, he's a piece of work," Alonzo said. "He hangs out in the enlisted lounge, writing wildly in his journal." "Great," Griffin said. "With our luck, he'll be in charge of entertainment at tonight's reception, or that mechanic with his toys." "Nah," Tish said. "I mean some of the UN folks. Have you talked to any of them?" "I got put on report by a blonde jerk with a stick up his ass." Tish laughed. "Captain Georchow. Yeah, a righteous dude, that one. Well, I caught up with a guard and she says Saunders has very big plans. He's a fast-track guy and he's acting like he's found the stairway to heaven. He's been keeping Dr. Marks on a short leash, and they don't think it's just 'cause she's got a good bod. I suppose saving the world would be worth a promotion or two, but if that's the case, why don't we have a general in charge? There's something funny going on around here." "Okay, so Saunders has a lot of pull and got himself a plum assignment," said Alonzo. "And since when isn't there something funny going on? We're in an army, guys, in case you hadn't noticed. The whole thing is a laugh riot. Have you noticed our rifles all have child-proof orange safety rings?" "Get off," said Griffin. "No lie. Look it up in Militerm if you don't believe me." "Child-proof, eh? Does that mean Hynek is released from duty?" They looked over to where Castle was grinning tolerantly at the red-faced boy. Tish laughed so hard tears streamed down his face. Chapter 16. Back in his room, Griffin casually wandered over to his small stack of books as if to check the titles. The flower was still hidden behind them, floating in the glass like a small piece of beauty in this dark, sinister place. He touched it with a fingertip, sending it skimming the surface of the water to butt gently against the far side of the glass. He changed into his dress uniform, signaled the door into mirror mode, and checked himself. The red Beatrice patch on the back of his dress greens made him feel like a target, but at least the inside didn't itch anymore. Whoever picked the thread for the embroidery must have gotten hot off imagining people in pain. Hawkins had clued him to a tailor who would line it with felt. He heard voices in the entryway and decided he was as beautiful as he was going to get. Time to head down to the reception. Waylon, Hawkins, and Alonzo looked up as his door opened. Hawkins smiled, Alonzo nodded, and Waylon looked nervous. They were all wondering how tonight would go. He had heard that the first reception on a new base was always strange. It could get wild after the CO left. It could get boring. It could, in many ways, shape the feeling of their time at the station. Nobody took it casually. By common consent, they decided not to wait for the rest of the platoon. It was nearly 1900, and better to be on time than all together. They moved in a clump toward the lift. Waylon pressed her nose to the glass of the lift as it descended and tried to identify the plants. Who cares what they are? It's pretty, isn't it? Said Alonzo. You don't understand. I don't know formal botany, but my mother always had an enclosed garden going, and I used to help her a lot. The garden was pretty important to us for food. She really knows her plants, and there just aren't that many different kinds, not among those in common use. Griffin kept his mouth shut. Under other circumstances, he would have joined the conversation, not even caring whether the lift was bugged or not. But this time, it just didn't feel right. So maybe these are uncommon plants, eh? Alonzo suggested. It's so strange. They all look roughly familiar, but none of them are quite right when I look at the details. Like that tree's a maple, but what type? I don't get it. When the doors opened on the first door, she hung back, still looking at the atrium with a puzzled expression on her face. Don't sweat it, said Hawkins gently. There must be someone around here who knows. Ask around at the reception. Waylon nodded and followed them reluctantly, looking back once as the door closed against the bright light of the atrium. They walked down the quiet hall into the main corridor. The gate was running again, its hum perceived more as a vibration in the deck than as a noise. Alonzo glared toward it as they turned right toward the briefing and simulation room where the reception was taking place. To Griffin's astonishment, the big man crossed himself. Griffin himself was a lukewarm theist, having adopted the Gaia faith his mother espoused, but he'd never seen someone do the sign of the cross outside a movie. Griffin turned his eyes away, a little embarrassed to have seen it, and instead watched Waylon's strong and narrow back as she walked towards the briefing room. He'd gone to bed with her once. Most of the platoon had tried each other that way. It had been nice, but not exactly hot for either of them. She had talked about her family, and he had thought about Jenny. Yet that was the way sex within the platoon mostly worked. Michaels thought the company used conditioning to keep it that way. If so, it probably wasn't a bad idea. On some assignments, quarters could get very close. A little sex was fine, but if it got into love, things could get really bad really fast. Witness how fast he and Jenny... No, this wasn't the right time to think about that. Why was he having so much trouble staying away from these thoughts? It was like something in his brain was picking at him to torture himself. As they rounded the curving corridor, they saw Tish, Michaels, and Sarge standing in the hall outside the briefing room, waiting for things to get started. Sure hope the food here is better than in the mess hall, said Michaels. Why would it be? All comes from the same place. Hawkins didn't look at Michaels, and his expression was uncharacteristically impatient. Yeah, Griffey and I just spent most of the afternoon cleaning it, too. Michaels held his nose. You don't want to know. You really don't. Maybe Cookie will take special pains for tonight, said Waylon. Maybe Cookie will get stage fright and leave it all up to his mess hall AP. Betcha that'd be an improvement. Sarge cleared her throat, and their heads whipped around. The colonel strode past them, closely followed by a very tight-faced Dr. Marks. As the door closed behind them, the platoon exchanged glances uneasily. The tension between Saunders and Marks was like a solid fog. Something was going on, and the platoon members half wanted to speculate, but were afraid of being overheard. Sarge started talking about the day's simulation runs, accusing them all of being scared to shoot bugs. She got a chorus of amused outrage. As Griffin joined in the hooting, he wondered if the others felt the same way he did. He was getting flashes of near-idiot joy at the thought of killing bugs, as though there was nothing in the world that could make him happier. Felt sort of creepy. Yet how else could you feel about things that were so ugly and violent? Cookie opened the doors. Saunders, Marks, her assistant Dr. Lee, Andrews, and several UN officers stood in a loose line near the door, not quite a formal greeting party, but pretty close. Griffin was introduced to Captain Jorchow. He shook the man's hand and received another cold glare in return. Great, just great. That guy must practice in a mirror every morning before starting his day, making sure he looked nasty enough. The food was prettier than in the mess hall, but no tastier. Hynek, John Da Silva, and Alvarez arrived in a clump while Griffin was testing a cheese ball. The hangar mechanic's booming voice filled the room, making it almost seem like a party. Griffin had moved on to the so-called ham when Dr. Mirren and her nurse, Marie Lucas, came in. Dr. Mirren caused a wave of silence through the room. She was not wearing a standard dress uniform. At least, Griffin had never seen one cut that low with a shiny flowing skirt. Hynek about dropped his teeth, but Griffin noticed he also rubbed his butt surreptitiously and made no effort to get close. Nearly every man and half the women in the room started an automatic drift toward the spectacular dock. Dr. Marks and the colonel barely glanced at each other and kept a stiff minimum distance of half a meter, but were almost never farther from each other than that. No one stood between them, even when there was room. It would probably feel like grabbing two hot wires to stand in the path. The pretty UN guard Griffin had seen earlier walked in. Michaels glanced at her and put down his plate. "Griffy, I'm gonna be a busy man," he said, grinning. Griffin rolled his eyes. "You are a piece of work, Michaels. You're gonna put the make on the UN?" Michaels' grin didn't change, but it didn't reach his eyes either. "If that's what it takes, sure. I don't mind boinking the lady. Jeez, kid, get a grip. I'm gonna find out what in hell's going on around here." Griffin looked at the guard dubiously. "First of all, I saw her putting her own make on Jorchow, the stick, the uptight UN captain over there. And second, what makes you think she knows any more than we do?" "My son," Michaels replied, "when the package looks like that, it never hurts to try." A minute later, Michaels and the guard were exchanging quiet words. Captain Jorchow looked furious and jealous. Griffin was tempted to tell Jorchow that ladies usually dumped Michaels fairly fast, but he didn't figure it would improve the man's mood. Besides, maybe the guard was paying him back for not acting interested until she'd offered him vodka. He heard Hawkins say, "Does anyone know if they have a language?" Griffin turned and was in a circle of 5 people, several of whom he'd never seen before. "Who cares? All they do is rip at us, and we have to fight back." The speaker was a UN man. "We're on their turf, aren't we?" said Hawkins. "Why shouldn't they blast at us? The colonel says they're intelligent. If we could talk to them, maybe we could get them to help with the mining." The UN man's face said he thought that Hawkins was pitifully naive. "Don't you think Saunders would have thought of that? He's got a civilian lab here and they're studying everything about this planet. Do you think we're fighting them just for fun? We all know it would be cheaper to mine if we could use indigenous labor. But do those critters look like something that might pick up a shovel and follow orders?" An assenting silence swept the group, and even Hawkins looked doubtful. "No, they sure didn't. You couldn't tell everything from appearance, though." Jenny had thought he looked like a good man. Griffin veered away from that thought and remembered what Michaels had said that afternoon. "I could swear the VR was not accurate." Not accurate. Did the UN even know for certain what the bugs looked like? Chapter 17. Saunders and Marks were finally speaking, but still looked unhappy. Saunders had a hand on the doctor's left wrist and was moving his thumb over the back of her hand while talking urgently in slow tones. Marks pulled at her hand, not quite yanking it away, but clearly not pleased with the man's grip. She said something quiet, and by the expression on her face, very bitter. "Interesting pair, aren't they?" said Dr. Mirren. He hadn't noticed her come up to stand beside him. "What do you mean?" "Don't be coy. Marks and Sanders." Griffin glanced back at the couple. Saunders looked confused and a little hurt, like a child whose toy has been taken away. Did he actually care for Dr. Marks? "I guess." She snorted. "I know sex when I see it. Poor, poor Dr. Marks." Griffin grunted noncommittally. "You wonder why I say that, don't you?" Griffin shrugged and sipped at his glass of synthetic scotch. "Marks always wins. That's her life. She's so smart it's scary, but she's so used to having things go her way she can barely deal with a hangnail. Saunders knows why he went after her, and he's willing to keep the deal he offered. She's only just starting to figure out that it's just isn't her sterling qualities. It's sour in her stomach." "What deal did he offer?" Dr. Mirren gave him an opaque look, and he felt like he had just flunked some kind of test. Saunders said something else. Marks's face went white, and she jerked her hand away. She put her drink down on the table with a clunk and spoke briefly to Dr. Lee. They both left the room without saying goodbye to anyone. The CO's face twisted briefly as he watched her go out the door. Then his expression smoothed back into a cold mask. Suddenly Griffin knew what the deal was. Saunders wanted something from Marks, but had genuinely fallen in love with her. Unwilling, unhappy, real-time love. Griffin looked back at Dr. Mirren, started to speak, and stopped. She grinned and nodded. She tossed off the rest of her glass and looked around the room. Several people looked back, hoping to catch her eye. "Think I should tag Hynek?" she said. Griffin gaped, startled by the change of topic, then laughed. "Depends on what you want. He rubs his ass every time he lays eyes on you." "Yep, but sometimes it is good to show a boy what's what before letting him get away with anything." "If you say so." Her gaze was focusing on the skinny private. He looked back, obviously a bit alarmed and obviously more than a bit entranced. Griffin didn't think Mirren saw the boy as anything but a set of hormone levels. Well, that was how Hynek saw Dr. Mirren, so maybe it was a fair match. Without looking back at him, Dr. Mirren started walking toward Hynek. Griffin shook his head and took another sip of his drink. The intense smoky fluid warmed his throat. It wasn't a bad rendition of a single malt. He wondered which one it was supposed to be. Glenmorangie? Michaels was still talking with the pretty UN guard leaning over her. She smiled up at him, but Griffin saw her glance casually around Michaels' arm, making sure that Zorchow was watching. He was. "That Michaels has all the luck." Griffin turned to see Lopez standing next to him, looking angry and more than a little drunk. "I don't know, but I think she's going to dump him for the blonde guy." Lopez shrugged. "Not what I mean, man. You seen Michaels and the Sarge?" Griffin kept his jaw from dropping. "The Sarge?" "Yeah, no shit. I saw him come out of her billet this afternoon." Griffin shrugged. "So? Maybe she was just chewing him out." "Yeah, if she was sure enjoying it. Had the same look on on his face as after that girl at Port Chicago, remember?" Griffin reluctantly remembered. "Drop it, Lopez. It's none of our business. I mean it. Besides, seems to me like Hynek's the lucky one tonight." said Lopez, and drained his glass. "That's not luck. It's child molestation." Griffin laughed. "Yeah, the doc knows what she's about, and I doubt he does. Well, he's above the age of consent, and I wouldn't mind consenting to that lady." "Or Dr. Marks, for that matter." "You think so? She seems pretty severe to me." "Protective shielding. Some of the softest and sweetest ladies are tough as nails on the outside." "If you say so." Lopez nodded ferociously, as though he had just won an argument, and headed for the bar. Griffin watched, thinking about how soft Jenny was from the outside and how tough she was at heart. The room seemed to recede, fading away as reality had faded away so often recently. He fought it, and then, leaning into a corner, just let it take him, no longer bothering to fight. Their last fight had been over her desire to have children. They'd been living together for nearly 2 years. She was near the end of her internship, and she thought it was the right time. She wanted to apply for a license to rear children together. He had figured she was joking the first time she mentioned it, or maybe just spinning a pleasant fantasy. Their life together wasn't perfect, but he was happy, and he knew that she was also, most of the time. Why should they make such a big change? Why now? In a few more years, he would be done with his training. They could get established in their practices, build up a little more money. And then what? I'll be 35, and my odds of getting infections or other complications will be rising all the time. What if it takes us a while to get pregnant? A year? 2 years? Pretty soon we'd be pushing the age limit. After 40, no SWA coverage for me. The economy just can't afford the complication rates of older births. There are no risk factors in either of our families. Why are you so worried? I'm not worried. I'm telling you why it is stupid to wait. My body is at the prime age for doing this. Your body certainly is prime. He reached for her, but she batted his hands away. Don't pull that on me now. I'm talking about our future here. No, you aren't. You're talking about the future that you want to force onto me. His voice turned sharp, even as his heart fell. They were going over the same path again, but that time hadn't followed the same path as before. She was deeply serious about her wish for a child, and infuriated at him for refusing to get his shunt reversed. They said terrible things to each other that night. He sneered at her for wanting to bring a child into this messed up world. She told him she would find someone else who was willing to be a father. He told her he wouldn't raise someone else's kid just because she was letting herself be jerked around by her hormones. She screamed at him that he didn't want a child because he still was one. That last one hurt the most. It was too close to his fears. What if she died in childbirth? Women did, more of them all the time. What if she didn't die but focused completely on the baby? He would no longer be real to her, would no longer be real to himself. So he had driven her out, hurt and enraged her with sarcasm and contempt, let her storm out of the house and drive away alone. She never came back. I'll pay you a penny not to tell me what you're thinking. The sick-bay nurse was standing in front of him, looking into his face with gruff concern. Griffin tried to smile, and saw by her face he had done a good job of it. I'm not feeling so good. Gate lag, I guess. I'd best head out. Probably so. You check in with us again if you keep on feeling lousy. So you can get out your horse needle? She grinned, black eyes sparkling in her broad face. It's not a horse needle. They're smaller. I'll bet. Hynek and Dr. Mirren were already gone. Captain Jorchow and the guard stood close to each other in a corner. She lifted her face to him, laughing. Griffin looked around the room and finally saw Michaels and the Sarge standing together with a few other members of the platoon. Michaels and the Sarge. He didn't want to think about it. He looked for Saunders and didn't see him. Usually the CO made a big deal of leaving a party, so folks would know that they could start letting their hair down. Not this time, he guessed. Or he had just missed it, so there was no one left he had to take leave of by protocol. Griffin walked. Chapter 18. Wayland caught up with him in the corridor and touched his shoulder. They walked into the lift atrium together and stood for a moment, looking into the dense foliage. The overhead light was off now. Griffin pointed up. I was talking to Marie Lucas, the nurse, earlier, he said. She told me the lights were keyed to Earth's, probably New York time. So it's nighttime in New York, Wayland said. She yawned. God, I could use a good night's sleep. I feel like I haven't slept in days, even though I have. She yawned again. Gate lag? Griffin took a deep breath. No, he said. I don't think so. I wasn't sleeping well for 3 or 4 days before we came through. Wayland didn't say anything as Griffin took her hand and steered her back into the corridor. They walked silently until they reached the airlock, and Griffin gestured, turning them both to enter the atrium hallway again. and then into the atrium itself. The spiral of lights was still on and cast a dim, almost moonlit glow over the plants. Instead of sitting on the bench, they stood within a screen of foliage, and Waylon put her hand out to touch a leaf. "Beautiful," she breathed. "But I swear to God, Griffin, I thought I knew trees." "Yeah," he replied quietly. "I know. It's just one more strange thing." "Like not dreaming?" she said. "Michaels was muttering about that, and how this station seems deserted, and why Militerm won't cough up any area maps. Shit, we're supposed to fight out there. The least they could do is give us some idea of the terrain." Griffin nodded. "Listen, I've got a theory, though. What if this isn't the only station on AJ3905? That would explain a lot, wouldn't it?" The pale oval of Waylon's face looked at him, indistinct in the dimness. "Yeah? Yeah, listen. If there was another station, that would be where the miners are, and the rest of the equipment. You know, there are only 2 skivers here. So unless someone's taken the rest of them out for a spin, or has them hidden somewhere..." He shook his head. "There's got to be another station, Waylon. It's the only answer." She was silent for a moment, and Griffin took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of growing plants and damp earth and the small, elusive sweetness of the lily-like plant by the bench. "Maybe," she said finally. "But what about the dreams, Griffin? And what about this?" She touched a frond above her head. "Listen, it's more than just knowing my mother's plants. I know some botany. It's kind of like a hobby. It's something I want to do when my enlistment's up. And I swear this isn't anything like anything I've ever known before." Her fingers turned the frond gently, pale in the dimness against the darkness of the plant. "You ever had something give you the creeps, Griffin? Well, this gives me the creeps." She looked up at him. "I don't know where we are, and I don't know what's out there. I don't trust the CO, and I think I don't trust Cranshaw anymore either. If there was another station, Griffin, they'd have told us about it. No reason not to. If there really are bugs out there, and we've got to fight them, why not let us see the terrain, get some idea of where we are?" She stared at him for a moment, and he stared back. Then silently, she turned and left him in the darkness of the atrium. Chapter 19. Griffin shed his dress screens with a sigh of relief. The stiff fabric chafed his skin. He stepped into the bathroom, twisted the knob for a short shower, and tried not to flinch as water poured over him. What a day. He cycled the shower to hot air, pulled a robe from the dispenser, and walked out into his room. The bed looked inviting, but he wasn't quite ready for sleep. He went over to the pile of books and picked up his journal, but instead of reading it, he looked down at the flower. It seemed to move by itself. Then the daydreams took him again, except that this time he saw his room, saw the bunk and the terminal and the chair, and at the same time he was inside an old oil painting. Adam and Eve faced the serpent coiling around the tree as it tempted them. Griffin wanted to warn them about knowledge, how the apple could kill them, but he could not speak. Beyond the naked figures was Jenny, her sweet face smiling from behind the trees. He tried to go to her. She changed into Dr. Marks, who said, with her voice shaking, "The future of our race is at stake here." The sky darkened, and a huge spider-like bug crossed in front of him. He backed away, filled with intense fear, and yet finding it intensely beautiful. Even inside his dream, he wondered how a bug could remind him of Jenny. Cranshaw said, "Exposure to the atmosphere of AJ3905 is very hazardous." Saunders said, "All aspects of this operation are being governed by the International Indentured Forces Act." Jenny blew him a kiss. He reached for her. Michaels grabbed his arm and said, "They give you a drug. A couple days, you'll stop dreaming. A couple days, you'll stop dreaming. They give you a drug. Stop dreaming." And Waylon tilted a face toward him that was only a pale blank oval and said, "It gives me the creeps, Griffin. It gives me the creeps." "Time for lights out. Lights out. Phoenix Company, I hope you all get a good night's sleep." Griffin jerked out of it, to find himself still standing beside the bookshelf. The journal had slipped out of his hands, and as he bent to pick it up, a wave of dizziness overcame him. He dropped the journal onto the shelf and staggered toward his bed. "Lights out, Phoenix Company." the AP said. Again, I hope you all get a good night's sleep. He twisted the blankets into a tangled nest and tried to bury himself away from all the worries and the questions and the endless, endless lies. Chapter 20. Good morning, Private Griffin. Please wake up. Griffin moaned and put his arm across his face. He felt as though he hadn't slept in days and his body ached. The lights in his billet seemed grotesquely bright. Wake up, Private Griffin. The voice, he knew from experience, would continue its even, friendly, unbendable demand until his body left the bunk. Then it would start nagging him to report to the mess hall for breakfast. He swung his legs over the edge of the bunk and sat up for a moment. Malfunctioning VRs, mysterious water, unknown drugs, crazy techs. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Had he really believed all those things yesterday? This was a strange mission for sure, but the rest was too ridiculous for words. He washed and brushed, pulled a fresh uniform from the dispenser, and headed for the mess hall. The AP for the food dispenser was still ridiculously cute. She wore a white cap and a low-cut waitress outfit. Griffin wondered idly if Private Wayland saw the AP as a sexy young guy. Hi, welcome to the mess hall. The 24-hour special is, the AP paused and gave him a big smile, PB&J with the crusts cut off. He punched for the sandwich tiredly. Sheesh. It made cutting the crusts off sound like the next best thing to sex. A wafflish sort of tray slid out, bearing a glass of orange juice and a white plate with a white sandwich. He took it to the nearest table, sat down, and reluctantly picked up the sandwich. It felt stale. He took a bite. Amazing. It was like grape-flavored sawdust. He glared at the offending sandwich as he chewed. Michaels claimed it wasn't coincidence that army food tasted terrible. Hey man, they want to keep us in fighting trim. They make that stuff on the spot, right down to the molecules, so they can make it taste any way they want. They don't want us to like it too much. Food's expensive, and who wants fat grunts? A voice sounded above him. Hey! Griffin looked up. It was Cookie. He smiled and said, How's the food? It's okay. Griffin really didn't want to talk to that look any more than he had to. KP duty this afternoon again. Cookie looked positively hurt. What do you mean it's okay? I programmed that recipe myself. I know what I'm doing. I used to be on television. Let me taste that. The cook plucked the sandwich right out of his hand. Griffin was so flabbergasted he didn't even object. The man took a bite. Damn, said the cook and stuck his tongue out several times as though trying to air wash it. I see your point. He set Griffin's sandwich down and walked away. Griffin looked at the now diminished sandwich. He supposed he was going to eat it, but it certainly hadn't gotten more attractive in the last few minutes. A shadow fell across his plate, and he looked up again. It was Dr. Marks. She smiled. So did Griffin. He stared, though. Too old for me. But that really is one fine-looking woman. Hardly looks like the same person as that hard lady at the briefing yesterday. She gestured towards the chair opposite him with a hand that was carrying a cup of coffee. Excuse me, do you mind if I sit here? No, please, help yourself. He half rose in old-fashioned manners, but she had already seated herself. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. Hi, I'm Andrew. Griffin, yes, I know. Don't you go by Drew? How did you know that? I have a good memory for names and faces. I guess I saw it in your service record or something. I don't know. She took a sip of her coffee, then set it down and began stroking her chin nervously. You were at the briefing yesterday, weren't you? Yes, I was. She shook her head a bit. I remember thinking what a kind face you have. Her eyes met his, and she smiled. I hope you don't mind my joining you. Oh, no, not at all. I'm rather embarrassed about yesterday. I didn't behave very well, I'm afraid. I was wondering about that. She wound her hands together and looked down at them. It all suddenly seemed very hopeless. She took another sip of her coffee. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you leave medical school? That's a direct question. It's a very good thing to be a doctor, Drew. Griffin sighed, feeling not quite angry, but more than a little annoyed. Nothing personal, but there's a bit of difference between a medical doctor and a plain old PhD. You're right, but you know what? I'm both. She grinned like a kid pulling off a particularly good stunt. Whoops, really? He felt his face heating up. Yes, I was a pediatrician. Did you like it? Yes, very much. Those little round heads, those little hands, her face filled with longing as her hands played out the shape of an infant. Yes, I loved it very much. So why did you stop? A little girl died. Someone I got too close to. The doctor hung her head, and her shoulders trembled. Griffin was astonished. People who got that upset about losing a patient seldom made it all the way through medical school. The death rate from infections alone was so high these days. True, children were always the worst, especially if you let yourself get attached, but she must have had an amazingly good track record on deaths to have been hit so hard after having been in practice. Mirren said that Marks was used to winning, that she nearly always did. What must it be like to live that way? Griffin couldn't imagine. He was used to losing. Dr. Marks's silence stretched so long he began to feel uneasy. Are you okay? She nodded, but didn't look up right away. When she did, her face was sad but clear. I have a family on Earth, a large family. My mom, my dad, my sisters, and my little girl. Oh yeah, I've got a lover, but I abandoned her. Thank God you're going to have a chance to help them. Do you believe in karma? She didn't seem to have heard him. Do you believe we pay for our sins? All the time, Griffin thought, but she didn't give him a chance to speak. We believe that murder is the worst possible crime a man could commit. We've killed our mother. Who judges us if I'm doing the right thing? Maybe death is the price for our sins, but can a whole race of people sin? And what about all the babies and the children and... Then Charlie Becker hustled up to stand right at her shoulder, almost touching her. He beamed down, ignoring Griffin. He looked ready to drool. Hi, Elizabeth, he said, and gave her a big smile with an odd little waggle of his fingers. Do you need somebody to talk to? Dr. Marks looked at him sadly but patiently. No, Charlie, thank you. That's very kind of you, but I need to get back to the lab. She looked at Griffin. Goodbye. Thanks for listening. Then she got up from the table and left, walking slowly. Charlie said, That was uncalled for, in an offended tone, and drank some of his orange juice. Griffin was tempted to say something about people who butt into other people's conversations, but figured it wasn't worth it. Hey, have a seat, he said. Perhaps this time he could get Charlie Becker to talk some more about the quantum gate and his speculations about where they were, but the little man just gave him a wild look, almost as if he'd been frightened. He scuttled out. Very strange, Griffin thought, picking up his PB&J with the crusts cut off. The doctor felt guilty about something. Here she was, running a project that could save the entire Earth, and she spent her time remembering a dead child and talking about payment for sin. And why had she said, We've killed our mother? That's how people talked about Gaia, about the Earth's ecosystem. But we're here to rescue Gaia, aren't we? Why is she using the past tense? Doesn't she believe Project Eden will work? It made the hair stand up on his arms. Michael says we can't believe what they are telling us. What was Dr. Marks just telling me? Whalen and Castle came in. Whalen's face was red and swollen. Castle's hard features looked almost motherly as she ushered Whalen to a chair in the corner and then went to the mess hall AP. Whalen turned to face the wall, and Griffin could see that she was crying again. When Castle passed carrying 2 trays, she waved her over and she came, glancing anxiously at Whalen. Griffin pointed at the private. What's up? Kansas City torched last night. Listen, would you let Hawkins know if you see him? I think Whalen would like to talk with him. You bet. Let me know if I can help. Castle's mouth twitched in a brief flash of her usual sarcasm. Griffin thought about his conversation with Whalen last night, about her mother's kitchen garden. Whalen's folks lived in Kansas City. Well, had lived in Kansas City. Oh, dear God. Castle, seeing his expression, nodded. Yeah, she said. Listen, there's something you can do. Whalen's going to take compassionate leave for the rest of the day. Can you tell Sarge? Yeah, Griffin said, feeling sick. He thought about how he'd feel if L.A. torched, then felt ashamed of himself for spinning off Whalen's tragedy. He dumped the rest of his meal in the recycler and headed back to his room. Kansas City dead. Gaia. Everyone had known that experiment in the Gulf was harebrained. Papa Maynard, the Green's main AI, had been shoving out terabytes of criticism ever since the initial proposal to increase atmospheric oxygen by seeding algae. Papa had even forecast the possibility of major fires. However, even Papa couldn't have predicted the firestorm. According to Tish, who maintained contact with other Green fanatics outside the army, the meteorologists had been going berserk ever since it started, talking about oxygen-rich winds coming off of thousands of acres of wildly growing algae and slow-moving storm fronts. Everyone else just watched in horror as a vast roll of fire moved slowly up the center of the nation, with the earth itself catching fire in places. The towering columns of smoke were visible from Moonbase, looking like a dirty thumb had smudged the green and brown continent. Griffin stopped suddenly, standing alone in the curving corridor of the quiet base, remembering his mother talking about the information she picked up at a Green rally less than a year ago. Papa Maynard, she told him, said oxygen production alone could not help Gaia, that the result could only be further destabilization of the ecosystem. After the firestorms began, few could disagree with the AI anymore. Yet, wasn't Project Eden aimed at just that, producing more oxygen? How could it work? He shook himself and started moving again. No. Fusion washing was also supposed to make a lot of water. That must be the difference. Let the sweet waters flow. It gives me the creeps, Wayland repeated in his memory. Griffin repressed a shudder and turned down the corridor towards Phoenix Company's quarters. Chapter 21. The door to Hawkins' room was open, and he was playing a game of Foursquare. When Griffin cleared his throat, he clicked off the images and looked up, smiling. "Morning, Guy. You're up early." "So are you." "Had trouble sleeping," said Hawkins. "Bad dreams?" Hawkins raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Funny question to ask. You know what? I didn't have any dreams. Almost seems like that's what kept waking me up. Like I was looking for them and couldn't find any." Griffin felt frozen for a moment, then shook it away. "So what's up?" said Hawkins. Griffin told him the bad news about Kansas City and relayed Castle's message. Hawkins sat up straight. His smile dropped. "Oh, brother. Thanks for letting me know. You said they're in the mess hall?" "Were a few minutes ago. Just came in, so I expect they're still there." Hawkins stood and sighed deeply. "I knew some folks in KC. Did they say if anyone got out before the firestorm hit?" "Well, a lot of folks had already cleared out of the whole area, but I don't know if there was a last-minute evac." Hawkins nodded and walked past Griffin, his normally calm face tight and sad. Everybody in the platoon knew what a firestorm did. They'd gone through that in training. It was horrible. Griffin's militerm was flashing as he walked into his room, announcing mail. Griffin hesitated, afraid it might be Jenny. He tapped for the sender. "Griffin, Barbara," the display said. Griffin took a deep breath and sat down, his hands on either side of the terminal. Her soft face was creased. He could see the line between her eyebrows that only showed when she was tired. She smiled. "Hi, it's me. Listen, I'm sorry about my letter yesterday. I didn't mean to upset you like that. They tell you that you're supposed to know what you're going to say before you start recording. I swear no matter how hard I try, I just can't do that. It all makes sense before I start, and then when I begin, I don't remember what I wanted to say." She paused, obviously searching for the right words. "Anyway, I am sorry about yesterday. It was your father's birthday, or it would have been." Griffin remembered the day his father died. He'd been late getting to the hospital, and when he walked into the room, he saw that the bed was empty. His mother had put her hand to her forehead, then looked at him and said, "He's gone, Andrew." He'd been surprised by his own grief, and by his anger. "So I was just upset about that. He would be so proud of you, Drew." She leaned forward, looking into her screen as though trying to catch his eye. "Please come home to me safe and sound. Drew, you're all I have left. Your father's gone. Your sister's working for that damn lab. Please, I need for you to come home to me." She sighed, and he wished he could touch her, to tell her to stop worrying, to stop pretending that he was something other than he was. He couldn't be her salvation. He couldn't even save himself. "The other day I was watching the news and there was..." Her face disappeared in a screen filled with text announcement. "The Office of Communication Management is sorry to inform you that under the authority of the Indentured Forces Act, we have found it necessary to edit this letter. We apologize for this necessity, but the correspondence was found to contain either inflammatory, confidential, secret, or otherwise jeopardizing information. Should you feel this letter was censored erroneously, you may file a formal protest with the Office of Communication Management." "What is this crap?" Griffin stood and shouted at it as though it might answer. "What the hell could my own mother possibly say that would be some big, deep secret?" The message just stared at him, solid and unbelievable. He slapped off the offending blurb and began stalking back and forth. He hadn't really wanted to listen to his mother. She made him feel too guilty, reminded him too much of everything that he had loved and mangled and run away from. But now that the image was lost, he felt bereft. She would have told him at the end that she loved him. Why couldn't those jerks have left that last part in, at least? He stormed out of the room and began circling the second-floor hall. His boots rang out on the spectrostone paving as he stomped his way past the doors and corridor. It didn't make any sense. They had censored Mom just as she was starting to talk about the news. She was okay, but something big must have happened. Was Militerm keeping Army folks from knowing about what was going on back home? Why was that? Central Processing was one floor up. Maybe he could get some answers there, depending on the interface. Militerm was set up for simple data retrieval and couldn't handle much in the way of queries. Griffin took the lift up from enlisted quarters. The CP was directly above, so he had less chance of running into anyone. He didn't know if the third floor was off limits. With his luck, it was, and he would run into Captain Zhurchow. He hesitated at the left exit, glanced both ways down the curving corridor, and saw no one. It looked like every other floor in this base. Why couldn't they at least make the various areas different colors? It would help people find their way around. Of course, maybe the designers didn't care about helping people find things. The door opened in front of him, and he entered a long, narrow room so crammed with displays and other equipment that he didn't immediately notice the man sitting at the main terminal. He hadn't expected anything on this order of magnitude. Military outposts don't usually have even one Series 43 computer, and he could see control panels for at least 3 without even trying hard. This place had enough power to do major climate modeling. If the control system matched, there was no way his small skills would get him anywhere inside it. "Estimate completion time frame, please." A huge face appeared, green but nearly human in appearance and fully three-dimensional. APs took their faces and bodies from human models. This image had a smooth wholeness and suggested it was being generated in real time. He was nearly certain this was entirely generated. Damn, what an interface this guy's got. That's a genuine artificial intelligence, the kind of entity that you didn't control so much as petition for cooperation. "Assuming no supply shortfall, 6 weeks, 3 days, it said. Then it turned its bodiless face to look straight into his eyes. "There is an unauthorized presence in the control room." The man looked up, saw Griffin, and gave him an exasperated look. "Private Griffin," said the artificial intelligence, "do you have authorized business here?" Griffin flinched, feeling the power of the thing's personality like a lash across his back. "I want to protest a censorship," he said, putting his shoulders back. "My mother sent me a letter and—" "Oh, really, Griffin, get a grip," the technician said. "If you're unhappy, protest to communication." He crossed his arms. "This area is restricted," the AI said. "You must leave now, please." The thing was almost more daunting when it tried to be polite. Griffin backed up a step, then turned to leave. This whole damn base is a restricted area. If they trust us so little, why don't they just lock us in our quarters? He took the lift downstairs and began circling the second floor, marching angrily through the empty corridors. He wanted to do something. The enlisted lounge was empty and the mess hall didn't smell good. He went back to his billet and paced impatiently. Another thing to put on the strange stuff list, he thought. Kansas City, dead. His mother's mail censored. Michaels and his underloaded mechanics and his VR drugs. It made him itch. He thought about querying Wayland's door, then decided against it. Despite their conversation last night, they had never been close, and at times like this, Hawkins was the best medicine the woman could get. Hawkins with his quiet strength and sustaining sympathy. But there was something he could do, he thought. He reached behind the books for the glass. It looked unchanged from the night before. He carefully emptied the water out and dropped the glass into the recycler, then put the flower in his pocket and headed for sick bay. Chapter 22. Dr. Mirren wasn't in, but he didn't really want to see her. Instead, he lounged against the nurse's desk, waiting for Marie Lucas to finish tapping something into her computer. He remembered doing this sort of thing during his internship, in the few minutes he would have between trauma unit catastrophes. Leaning against the nursing station, shooting the bull with the overworked nurses, with the other interns, with Jenny. Gallows humor to cope with the sea of human misery that washed over them every shift. He and Jenny had once made the mistake of telling some of those jokes at the dinner table when his mother had come to visit, and she had been shocked. "How can you joke about people dying of thirst?" Barbara Griffin demanded. "Or of environmental poisons? That's horrible." Jenny had reached across the table and captured Barbara's hands in her own. "Because if we don't laugh, we'll start crying, Barb," she had said earnestly. "And if we start crying, we may never be able to stop." Griffin shook the memory away abruptly as Marie turned from the computer and looked at him. "You got a good excuse for being here?" she demanded. "Or you looking for a shot?" "Hey, peace, it's me, remember? The ex-med student?" He grinned at her. "I just wanted to examine your equipment." Marie laughed, the first full-bodied laugh he had heard in ages. "Boy, you have some guts," she said. "Either that or you don't have the brains God gave a fish. What do you want with me?" "No, really, I want to look at the equipment," Griffin said. "I mean, as much as I might want to, Nurse Lucas, I have far too much respect for you to mess with you. Honest." He leered at her, and she grinned. "Okay, what?" she said. Griffin walked across the sickbay. "It's this thing," he said. "The Jensen Ultra. They were just about to get one at the hospital when I joined up. I've been curious about them. Can I take a look?" "Not with your own hands, you don't," she said, and came across to him. "You got any idea how much these babies cost? Here, I'll show you." Perfect, he thought, as the machine hummed to life. He waited until the hum filled the area, then touched her shoulder, and when she looked at him, he put the lily in her hand. She looked startled. "It's from the atrium," he said under the sound of the machine. "Can you run a scan on it?" She didn't move, and for a moment he wondered if he had miscalculated, if Marie Lucas was in on whatever was going on here, if she'd turn him in. She looked at him steadily, and he forced himself to look back. Then she nodded and closed her fingers around the flower. "Tomorrow," she said, as quietly as he was speaking. "I'll have to juggle, but I think I can do it. You want a full scan?" "I don't know," he said. "I want to know what it's made of." She slid the flower into her uniform pocket and powered down the Jensen Ultra. "There," she said. "That's pretty much all there is to it except for the programming end. And if you think I'm letting you get near the code, soldier boy—" No. Griffin raised his hands, palms out. "I wouldn't dream of it. Thank you, Nurse Lucas. You've been very helpful." "You get going before I get my syringe," she said, hands on hips, and Griffin backed quickly out of the sickbay, his hands firmly on his ass. He could hear her laughter as the door closed between them.